This is a brief video on how to enter data into the LEPR-TraceDs database without using the Excel template file. First, log in, as you usually do. I'm going to log in as the administrator. And scroll down to the bottom of the first page, and you should see a field that says LEPR-TraceDs Data Entry Portal. If you don't have that field displayed, send me an email at Ghiorso@olefmresearch.org, and I'll set up your account so that you have permission to do data entry. If we click on that link, you'll be taken to a page where normally you would upload an Excel template file that contains data into the LEPR-TraceDs database using the Choose File and Submit command. But you can simply come down to the second box here, click on Create New Source, and a new source file will be created for you. This new source file will be listed in the Examine Modify LEPR-TraceDs data source, and you'll see it. It will be your username, it will be the date and time it was created, and it will have generic author year information. This is the new data source that was created. You can always tell it's the new one because of the date and time. We want to fetch that data source. And now we can actually construct the entire data source from scratch. So the first thing you do, step one, is to create a laboratory entry. So I'm going to click on Create Laboratory, and in the text field, I'm going to enter the laboratory. We'll make one up. We'll call this OFM Research Redmond Labs. And the next step is then to enter the author information or the person that enters the data. And so I'm going to click on Update here. And that brings me up a dialog box. And I'll create some author information to attribute these data to. And we'll just make something up. I think we'll have this appear in the occasional papers of OFM Research. Make this volume 1, pages 1 through 34. No DOI because none has been assigned. And we'll give the paper a title, On Some Bad Data. Click Submit. And now the author information and the reference information has been included. And so now we're ready to actually enter data at the terminal here, or at the browser. So you create a new experiment. It takes you to the experiment detail dialog box page. And now we can enter the metadata for the experiment. So we can give the experiment a name. If we had a sample number, an official sample number, we could give it a sample number that the experiment was based on. We can choose now from this list the laboratory that we entered. And I'll go down. The newest laboratories are always at the end of the list, so I know that OFM Labs there is at the end. We choose the device the experiment was done in, let's say a 1-atmosphere experiment. We choose the container the experiment was done in. Let's say it was done in a platinum capsule. Enter the temperature in degrees centigrade for this experiment, the uncertainty on the temperature, the pressure. This is a 1-bar experiment. Pressure is in gigapascals. The oxygen fugacity under which the experiment was done. The list of possible entries is over there on the right. We'll just choose NNO. The duration of the experiment. Well, I ran this experiment for 3 days, let's say, but it wants the input in hours. So I'll put 3 in there for 3 days and convert days to hours. The phases that are present in this experiment, it's a very simple one. Let's say that there are 2 phases present. One is liquid. The allowable abbreviations are indicated over there on the right. And now the other phase, let's say, is tridymite. So I can start typing TR. It looks for the allowable phases for me, and those are the 2 phases. Whether or not the experiment is doped, this is applicable to trace elements. So this is not a doped experiment. This experiment is not going to be made public yet. It's still part of the private experimental cache. Only you can see it when you enter it. And the LEPR database will hold this experiment. LEPR is the major element database. You can see there's a trace element database, an aqueous database, a kinetic database. It really doesn't matter what you choose here. They're all searchable from the interface, but for classification purposes, we'll leave this as the LEPR database. And then we'll indicate some notes about this experiment. This is a pathetic experiment. Period. So that's all the metadata for the experiment. Now let's enter some information about the phases. So we come down here and we say add an entry for a phase. We click and we choose the phases that are present. Now we could click the bulk composition of the starting material. That's what bulk corresponds to. But I won't enter that. We're just going to enter the composition of the liquid. And so when you enter the compositional information, you get to choose from the various components that are available to describe the composition. You put in a value for the amount of silica in the system, an uncertainty for that value if you have it, the units for that value. Here you can see all the units that are displayed. I'm going to leave it at weight percent. The method that was used to analyze the bulk composition or the composition, this is the electron microprobe. And where the analysis was done. We'll just choose Arizona State University because that's where I flew to use the microprobe. And once all that information is done, simply click Add, and now that silica analysis is part of the experimental composition for the liquid phase. I put in 100 because I'm going to pretend that this is pure silica liquid, which is coexisting with tritomite. So now let's go down here and find tritomite in the list of available phases. It's a long list. The majority of them are in alphabetical order, a few random, but the majority in alphabetical order. Here's tritomite. So now we have tritomite phase, and again, we can input the composition of the tritomite phase. And we'll pretend we flew to the American Museum of Natural History here to analyze the tritomite. So if I put add, now we have the composition of the liquid and the composition of the tritomite. And we can add additional components if we had information on additional components. That's the full characterization of this experiment. So now if I go back to the listing page, you'll see that that experiment is listed. And again, if I want to go to review that experiment, update it, delete it, I can simply click the appropriate link here. If I update, I'm going to come right back to that experimental database, or that experimental detailed listing, and then you can change things as you will. All right? So if you proceed this way, you can enter a whole series of experiments associated with this particular experimental study. And when you're all done, if you return to the user contribution page, that experimental source is listed. You can go away, you can log back in. It will always be available for you to view. But if you would like to make this experimental source now a part of the public database, what you must do is come down to this little box here that says notify the administrator. You must choose the experimental grouping that you've just typed in as the choice for this dialog box, and then send off a notify email to the administrator. The administrator will get that email, will review the data source, and then move it over into the public database. That's all you need to do to enter data by hand on the LEPR-TraceDs interface.